This is Kathy Hanville with Hot Topics in California Law and Ethics, and this video is on ethical issues with termination. So there are, of course, ethical standards on termination. And again, I'm not going to read this all to you because you get the packet, you can read it yourself. But Camp gives some lists for reasons for terminating. Code of Ethics of NESW gives some more information and also brings in the issue of abandonment. ACA also brings in competence as a reason to terminate, and also talks about referring out people based solely on your personal beliefs. And then we can get into ethical standards on abandonment. So, of course, all of the standards say, we obviously need to not abandon our clients. And part of that is assisting in making appropriate arrangements for continuity of care. Another issue around abandonment is your standard of care. So what are some issues that can arise with termination? Abandonment, following the standard of care for termination, and the importance of a termination plan. So what is abandonment? It is a legal issue that is defined as part of a medical malpractice case. So these are the 4 parts needed for it to be considered abandonment. There's an established relationship. The provider stops treating the patient when they still need treatment. The ending is abrupt and the patient is unable to find a new provider. And the patient has adverse effects as a result of the abandonment. And a quick learning objective check-in that those 4 components that make up the definition of abandonment are one of our learning objectives for this course. So what might abandonment look like? This is an example that I found in The Therapist. And this patient had begun getting treatment, had canceled some appointments, but the therapist also canceled appointments. The therapist did not show up for the regularly scheduled appointment. The patient left 14 voicemail messages, and the therapist did not respond. The patient then began to have suicidal thoughts. So the board sanctioned the person, considering it abandonment as an extreme departure from our standard of care. So what is standard of care's definition? It means that the therapist is handling the situation in a manner that is consistent with what most therapists would do, professional therapists, obviously. So how might you terminate with a client? You should document any termination plan, including any referrals given, when the notice was given, and the reason for termination. If you have multiple sessions before ending, document in each session any discussion about termination that occurred. Working on creating an ideal termination, which I will discuss further in a second, and any deviations from an ideal termination should be documented thoroughly. So what is an ideal termination? The client having time and space to reflect on the effects of the therapy for them. The client being able to see forward using the tools they gained from therapy. And the client working through feelings on ending the therapy relationship. So what happens if you need to end treatment with someone who still needs treatment? You need to emphasize with them the need for continued treatment. Review with them the reasons you cannot continue seeing the client. Make reasonable efforts to help them find another provider. And give them a reasonable time frame to find someone else. So what are some special circumstances that come up with termination? scope of competence, conflict of interest, lack of benefit to client, closing a practice, ending an internship, financial issues, is this a termination or not, and what if a client is in crisis. So first, let's talk about handling termination with a client whose needs are out of your scope of competence. This is a situation where many times therapists are afraid of abandonment, and then they don't refer out a client who's no longer within their scope of competence. If you have a client that is out of your scope and you're unable to get enough consultation to change that, you are ethically obligated to refer the client out. Not doing so could put you in a situation of liability for working outside your scope of competence. You should follow the guidelines for referring out someone with whom you can no longer work with. Conflict of interest. Again, this is a situation where you must refer out. It's ethically called for. You must make referrals and document the decision. You may also choose to get consultation on the decision, which you should also document. Lack of benefit to client. So this is a stickier situation because you and the client might disagree on whether they're benefiting or not. The best options are to gain agreement for the referral from the client, and if that cannot happen, then I would do a consultation with another provider to get a second opinion on the transfer of services. And again, document this all in the chart. What about when you're closing your practice or ending an internship? Of course, you are obligated to give clients ample notice and make referrals for another provider. If an internship is ending, most of the time you're going to follow agency policies. And again, you might be able to refer to somebody within the agency, or you may be able to take the client with you depending on the agency policy and where you're going after the internship. What about financial issues? So we are not obligated to work with clients that are unable to pay the fees. However, we should document any discussions we've had with the client about amounts due and efforts made to collect them before terminating with the client. You should also provide some low-cost therapy referrals. Making sure the client has been made aware of, in writing if possible, of the financial expectations. The client should not be in crisis. You should explore the clinical issues of termination with the client, preferably in session, and document this discussion. This issue may also come up if insurance coverage changes or lapses. You should discuss different options with the client. You may choose to offer a sliding scale, but you're not obligated to do so. But as always, you should work with them to find another referral. Is this a termination or not? So we should never allow a situation where it's unclear whether or not a client is working with us. If there's a situation where there's a lack of contact from the client, you should try and contact them and clarify the situation. If you are unable to make contact, you may want to send a letter, but at minimum document that you attempted to call them. If you are unsure if a client is still working with you or not, then you could be potentially held liable if something happened to them. You may want to put something in your informed consent stating that if a client's not in contact for a certain period of time, like 30 days, that their case will be terminated. What if the client is in crisis? If at all possible, try to avoid terminating with a client in crisis. Try and stabilize the crisis first. And you really want to make sure that the client is linked to another provider or service before ending. That may include them attending a first or intake appointment before ending with you. How much notice should I give a client? This can depend on whether this is agreed upon termination or it's a termination because the therapist is making the decision. For an agreed upon termination, you should discuss it with the client and agree on a time frame. Some clients like short terminations and some clients like longer ones. Just make sure that there's enough time to process the feelings that are involved with the ending of the relationship. Clients you have seen longer will generally need a longer termination. If you're deciding to end the service, you should definitely try and give 30 days notice. To write a termination letter or not. Many therapists write a termination letter when they end their work with their clients unexpectedly. They document the reasons for the termination and any referrals given, and then advise of the need for continued treatment. CPH, which is a insurance malpractice provider, actually recommends not sending a letter. They recommend speaking with the client directly in person or via phone, And their position is that a letter can provide an opening for an abandonment case, and if a case is open, the letter will be scrutinized thoroughly. They do say if you want to send a letter after a phone call, you can do that. They recommend documenting this off therapy. Other authors and researchers have said letters can make an ending disruptive and make it less likely a client will return. So what if a client wants to terminate services? That's pretty easy. They have the right to terminate services at any time and for any reason. They may discuss it with you or not. You should just document how it happened in your files. So what are some recommendations for private practice? Be thinking about termination from the first session. Make policies about termination available in the formed consent document. If treatment needs to end when the client still needs treatment, document this and make referrals. Make sure you're documenting treatment goals and progress throughout the relationship. And document. And in the packet, there's some references. Thanks for listening, and have a good day.